Hey guys, this is Tim at shootsteel.com. Today we're working on Cody's custom built 25 Creedmoor. This is a rifle that was put together by Dale Hegstrom at Little Crow Gunworks in Spicer, Minnesota. The details of the rifle will be in the video description. What we're working on today isn't, I guess, what I would call advanced reloading tactics, but being that this is a 25 Creedmoor, there are no existing factory ammunition offerings. So we're going to be hand loading for this. We did specify the reamer that was used to cut this barrel, so we have a pretty good idea of where the throat is and where it's going to land, where we're going to land for seating depth and cartridge base to ogive length, but we're going to show you how to measure it today. So there's a few different things you need to complete this process. There's two different ways to do this process, really. There's the inexpensive, inaccurate way, which is using just a bullet that you seat long and you smoke the bullet and basically jam it in and try to get it to soft seat and then back it out. You can do it that way, but the problem is, depending on how much neck tension you have on your case, it's going to shove the bullet further in, so you'll get a different measurement depending on how much neck tension is on your case. So it's not really a very effective way to do it. There is no perfect way, but this is probably what I've found to be the best way in doing this for 20 years. The first thing you need is the Hornady lock and load overall length gauge. This is what I've found to be probably the simplest and least expensive tool for the job. What goes along with that are these Hornady modified cases. So it's a special threaded case that threads on the end of this tool. This one happens to be a 6.5 Creedmoor because the 25 Creedmoor is essentially the same thing, just neck down. So what I did to prepare this case for use in a 25 Creedmoor is I just ran this modified case through 6.5 Creedmoor bushing die. We use Wooden dies whenever we possibly can from Wooden Gunworks. They make full-length bushing, sizer, and seating dies, and I feel like they're probably the best on the market for this application. You can buy different bushings that you can insert into the sizing die to change the neck tension. So all I did was use a 6.5 Creedmoor bushing die with, I think it was a 283 bushing, ran this up in there, and it sized the neck down enough so that these 25 caliber bullets slide in and out nicely. They don't really stick, they basically fall right out. But it's straight enough that it'll work for the purposes of this measuring process. So we have two different bullets here. One of them is the Berger 135 hybrid target, which is what we're going to be shooting. And then this is a Serbian 100 grain soft point that we're basically using to fire form brass and to start to break the barrel in there. I don't really believe in breaking in a barrel, but we're essentially trying to get a little bit of fire cracking on the throat, start to get the lead ready to accept bullets, kind of blast away any inherent imperfections that are in the throat and the lead. And a lot of barrels, most of the time, barrels will break in the sense that in the first couple hundred rounds, the velocity will start to creep up. So from the first round to the, say, the 100th round or 200th round, you'll get a little bit of velocity increase. And in the industry, we call that the hump. So the barrel will work its way up to the hump, and that's essentially the peak velocity that it's ever going to produce. And from the hump, it slowly starts to die. So although this isn't a wildcat chambering, meaning that the brass doesn't need to really form to the chamber, it does need to stretch. So this is Peterson brass. They make some of the best brass in the industry, along with Lapua and others. But when you put it in the chamber and fire it, the shoulder does stretch a certain amount to hit the end of the chamber. So that's the reason for the fire forming. With the rest of the tools, so we had the overall length gauge, and then with that, you're gonna have to buy a separate set of the Hornady lock and load comparators. It comes with this base holder and then a bunch of different inserts. This is for 25 caliber because that's what we're using. And what this does is it measures to the ogive. So there's two different ways to do everything. A lot of times when people measure the overall length of their cartridge, they measure to the tip you can do that. It's not an accurate or effective way of measuring because these tips are not consistent. So you can measure a bunch of different cartridges and you can have an overall length with a difference of up to 10 thousandths or more because you're measuring to the tip. If you want consistency and accuracy, that's not a good way to do it. It's better to use this insert because this measures to the ogive, where the ogive basically meets the bearing surface. And that will give you consistency between 1 and 3 thousandths. Sometimes it's even perfect depending on whose bullet you're using. Burgers, it's usually within 1 to 2. Other manufacturers, it can be a little bit more. So this is a very important tool for not only this application, but for hand loading in general. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take, this is a fired case that was fired at full pressure. So we know that it has stretched to fill that chamber. And there's another phenomenon called springback where a lot of people aren't familiar with this. When you fire a case, as soon as you cam the bolt up, it doesn't appear that it is, but the bolt face is actually moving back. And when you do that, as soon as you start to cam it up, this case actually stretches. So when by the time you get to here and go like this and that case is flying through the air, it's now bigger than the chamber. So when I go to put this in, it's been fired at full pressure. Sometimes the bolt won't even close. In this instance, I can feel a little bit, so now I'm feeling pretty heavy pressure right here. So it will close, but there's a lot of pressure on this bolt because that case is now bigger than the chamber and I'm squishing it to get it in there. It doesn't really want to be in there. So we know it's been fired to fill that chamber. If I take this modified case and put it in there, it's as if nothing is in there. There's no pressure whatsoever. It goes in cleanly, which tells us that this is smaller than the chamber. The reason this is important is these are two different sizes, but we're using this to measure. So if we know this is smaller than the other one, we have to account for that difference if we want an accurate measurement. You can simply measure this using a shoulder bump gauge. This happens to be from Little Crow Gunworks. There are other companies that make them. This is the .400, which is good for any of your Creedmoor size, 308 size, standard, let's say 473 bolt face cartridges. So this is the modified case. It measures to the shoulder, just above the shoulder, and we're getting 1.517. So we'll record that. So the modified case is 1.517. The fired case, which should fill the chamber, as we saw, with the cam bolt over, or the bolt cam over being a little bit tight, 1.521. So there is a difference. What's that difference? It's 4 thousandths. Why is that important? Well, one, for this measuring process, but two, for anybody that's been hand loading for any length of time, you're going to find that in order to have really consistent, really accurate ammunition, it's just that, it needs to be consistent. So every time it goes in the chamber, the bolt needs to cam over and not have, you know, pressure with some, not pressure with others, in order to make sure that there isn't any tension or pressure. When you're sizing, you need to press the shoulder back. And I only recommend full-length sizing dies, as we showed you with the wooden dies that we use. I don't recommend neck sizing. As you'll see in the video, neither does Mr. Cortina. But the reason I don't recommend that is you want a full-length size so that way when it does go in, it's consistent and there's no pressure on that bolt. So full-length sizing dies, any full-length set you get, you'll have the ability to, quote, bump this shoulder back. What does that mean? It means you're going to have to run this up into the die and screw the die in until it starts to make contact with the shoulder, and then you'll screw it in enough so that way when you cam the handle on the press all the way over, it presses that shoulder back. So when you take a measurement using this bump gauge, you can see it physically getting shorter. Not see, but see on the measurement. So why do you want to bump it back 2 thousandths? Well, 2 thousandths I've found is enough so that it will make it so that that bolt cams over nicely as if there's nothing in there. Less than 2, some guys do less than 2. What I've found is less than 2, then some of the cases you'll feel and some you won't. And if we want consistency, you want them all to be the same. You don't want to feel any of them. So that's why I recommend 2. You can go 3, you can go more. The farther you go, the more that case has to stretch every time, and it will eventually, if you're stretching it too much, it will shorten the life of the case. So we recommend 2 thousandths bump on just about anything. Sometimes I'll do 3 on magnums, because I found that doing 2 thousandths with magnums, sometimes you can still feel, like I have a 257 Weatherby Magnum that at 2 I can still feel it, so I have to go to 3. All right, I think we're ready to take our first measurement. In order to do that, we have to take the bolt out, and then in order to be able to feel the bullet in this modified case, so this plunger, once you loosen this thumb screw, this plunger moves in and out so you can manipulate where the bullet is in the case. So we screw this in, and then we'll run the plunger up just enough so that the bullet will sit in there but not fall all the way in the case. So we're going to start with the Burger 135. We'll push it in farther than it would be pushed in if you're actually seating it, so it's basically past the bearing surface at this point. And then we put this into the chamber, but in order to be able to play that bullet back and forth but not lose it in the barrel, we use a cleaning rod inserted in the barrel with no tip, just the open threads. And we slowly put it in through the brake, try not to slam it into the crown. Once it's past the crown, you can run the cleaning rod all the way in until it comes into the opening of the action here. So I'm putting the tip of the bullet in the cleaning rod, and now I'm applying pressure and pushing the whole thing into the chamber. So I can feel that modified case bottom out in the chamber. Once I know it's bottomed out, I loosen this thumb screw and then use this finger to run the plunger, and I can feel the bullet kind of slamming into the lead and stopping. So what I want to try to do is apply a consistent amount of pressure here. I don't want to force it in so it swages and then it's hard to get it back out. I basically just want to apply a decent amount of pressure so it bumps into that lead and stops. Then I tighten the thumb screw and back the whole thing out, and then we take our first measurement. Okay, so we got our first measurement, which was 225, and you'll find that when you do this, it's really a feel thing, and you can get different measurements depending on how hard you're pushing on this plunger, this gray plunger, to seat the bullet. Because when you're slamming into this rifling, how hard you're pushing with this back finger dictates how far it goes in, which is why you want to try to be as consistent as you can in order to get consistent readings. So we'll see what our second one was. And the exact precision of this is not super important, from the fact that we're only doing this once to find out where it is, so we know that this is as long as we can ever load these, and we don't want to load them longer than that, because then we're in a situation where we're jamming, which can cause the bullet to get stuck. So if you load a loaded round, cam the bolt up and try to pull it back, sometimes the bullet can stick, and then the bullet stays, you get the case and the powder dumps all in all your stuff, and you're not going to have a good day. So all we care about this measurement for, so we know that that's as long as we're ever going to load it. We want to stay short of that to make sure we're not jamming a bullet. So on this test we got a little bit longer, and that's fine. What we're trying to find is repeatability here. So if it settles in with how hard I'm pushing at that 2 and 220, then that's the number we're going to use. So I know I'm seated all the way in. Use the plunger. Again, it's really a feel thing, so I'm trying to apply the same amount of pressure, starting to swage that bullet just a tiny bit into that lead. There we go. It's 2 and 220. We'll do it one more time. And you don't have to do this 3 times. I just have gotten the habit of doing it to make sure I'm, with my human error involved, I still can find some kind of consistency. 2 and 220. And I'm kind of wiggling this and applying pressure to make sure it's settled in. 2 and 220. Okay, so now we know that's where the lead is. That's as far as we want to seat that in there. And then we're going to add this because this modified case is smaller than a fired case. So it's all 2s. So that is max cartridge base 2 ogive. If you don't measure bullets that way, you should start, because that's the most accurate way to do it. If you're an overall length guy, you can do that, but you're never going to get peak consistency and therefore peak accuracy doing it that way, because these tips are inconsistent. So get in the habit of measuring to the ogive. That's going to be the most consistent way to do it. So we know that that's as long as we ever want to seat anything. So for our load development, I usually start about 20 thousandths back. It doesn't matter where you start. Just pick a point to start that you know is not going to stick in the rifling. What I have found though is that the closer you start to this number, the earlier that you're going to encounter pressure when you're doing your load development, because the pressure curve is going to peak more rapidly, where in this case we might pressure out at, let's say, 43 grains of H4350, where if we started seating the bullet a little deeper, it might not be 43, it might be 43.2 or 43.4. We might be able to get a little more powder in there because we're widening that pressure curve, and therefore get a little bit more velocity. Because we don't have a tuner on this rifle, we're going to have to tune the groups with seating depth. If you guys don't know how that process works, I'd suggest Eric Cortina's video. It's called Don't Chase the Lands, meaning don't chase your lead, don't chase your rifling as it starts to burn out. He has 2 videos, part 1 and part 2. If you're only going to watch one of them, I'd say watch part 2. Tells you everything you need to know about how to tune your load and tune your rifle using seating depth. So we're going to start at 20 thousandths jump just to find our powder charge and what powder charge the rifle is most happy with. So that's where we're going to start. Once we find our powder charge, we'll then tune the seating depth to get the group size to come in. Because we might find that with this seating depth, when we find our powder charge, meaning we find the powder charge that's super consistent from a velocity standpoint, this seating depth may not group very well at all. We do all our testing at 100 yards for load development. We may find that this shoots a 3-inch group, but then you start tuning that seating depth in 3 thousandths increments. So you always shorter, not longer. You always go shorter. And as we tune that shorter, we'll find that the group size will then start to come together to a point where it's really, really consistent. And what you want, as Eric will say in his video as well, you want at least 2 seating depths that shoot really well. So we may find that by the time we get down to 2 and 180, it shoots really well, and 2 and 183 shoots really well. That tells you have a nice wide node to work with, and you're going to want to stay somewhere in that node. What Eric usually does, and I tend to agree with, is whatever the longest seating depth is that shoots well, use that number, subtract 1,000th to account for seating errors in your press, and you'll have a nice consistent load. So we just wanted to show you guys how to do this. Again, you'll find on the internet there's a lot of different ways to do everything. We're going to start doing more videos like this and start up a podcast here where we talk about what we have found that works. If it doesn't work, I'm not interested in it. So it needs to work. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's ways that are accurate and ways that are inaccurate. We try to focus on the ways that are accurate, that are going to save you the least amount of, or save you money, save you frustration, and take the least amount of time to get accurate, consistent results. So thank you guys for tuning in. Again, look for more content like this. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you haven't already done so, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.